Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a clown world. That's what I've discovered, and I think it's the only way to explain the reality that surrounds me. That we live in a clown world. Everything is clowns. Everyone is a clown. I'm a clown. I'm just standing here, just surrounded by clowns, even though I'm in my little fun house of mirrors at my local circus. But this is society which we live in, and it's just clowns. It's clowns everywhere. Send in the clowns. I don't even know how to really properly begin the topic for our first section here on the Commander's Cabin podcast, because I thought about this from so many different angles, because there's just so much stupidity to it, and I don't really know which route to go down first. The first section revolves around the Pete Sinclair situation. If you don't know the Pete Sinclair situation, watch my BotCon drama video. I don't want to repeat the whole thing here. But basically, there was a dude who everyone was calling racist on Twitter, and I look into it and find out that the dude's not racist, so I make a video defending him, saying this dude isn't a racist. During that, I make the claim that he is, and I quote, a boomer conservative. Now what does that mean? What does that mean exactly? I don't even know if I want to get into this part yet. There's so many parts to deconstruct here, but basically I call him a boomer conservative. Basically, this dude isn't racist, he's a boomer conservative. So calling him Hitler too, and accusing him of all this racism and making him sound like this vile neo-Nazi is purposefully slander. Ultimately, it comes down to you not liking his political beliefs and being uncomfortable with some political beliefs, and really being only knowing things uncomfortable to you as racism. So you just apply the term racism wherever you like to place it. Now, when I made that video, I'm thinking, wow, I hope he doesn't take offense to the term boomer conservative, because it's literally a meme. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, I'm like one of the only people defending this guy, and the other side are calling him racist, homophobic, and a bigot. So I would think, if he had half a brain, he would understand that that was a meme, and probably not deal too much with it, especially with all the other stuff being thrown against him. It has come to my knowledge, through Weebot, shout out to Weebot, that Pete Sinclair has since changed his Facebook profile bio to boomer conservative, and then in parentheses, not something like not my words, not actually true. So a passive-aggressive swipe at me from my video over the conservative boomer remark. I'm sorry, would you rather me call you a racist bigot? Is that what you'd rather have? Because this dude has said nothing about anything else people have been saying about him, just the passive-aggressive swipe at me. One of the few, if not only, I saw one other person defend him. One of the two people defending him, he takes a swipe at me for a meme, for a joke. This is a clown world. What is happening? Nothing is real. Nothing really matters. It's all just a joke. Nobody has any semblance of humanity. Everyone is subhuman. I'll even throw myself in those ranks. Everything's subhuman. Nothing really matters. Because we live in a clown world. There's no such thing as logic. There's no such thing as reason. There's no sense of sense. There's no sense of sense. What do I mean when I say conservative boomer? Well, we know what a conservative is, or at least for the purposes of this podcast, we know what a conservative is. What's a boomer? If we were to take it at face value, boomer is a term that's short for baby boomer, for the generation born after World War II, like immediately afterwards. Like from 1946 to like the early 60s. People born in that generation are pretty old. And typically online, when you see people call other people boomers, 99.9% of the time they are not talking to an actual baby boomer. Boomer has been comedically applied to apply to anyone who exhibits traits of being old. And what we mean by being old, well, let me tell you, in my interpretation, what are the traits of a internet meme boomer. It has nothing to do with age. Where do I want to start this? I think it comes from not being able to catch up with changes and trends in the social world. Well, let me get to the heart of the matter. It comes down to, I think one major trait of a boomer is randomly and unsolicitedly giving an opinion automatically with the perception that it is an unpopular opinion, despite a whole bunch of people also rattling off that opinion, and it not actually being necessarily an unpopular opinion. It might be a controversial opinion, but it's not. But an unpopular opinion and a controversial opinion are not the same thing. A controversial opinion is an opinion that has a significant backlash towards it. Unpopular means it's not a popular opinion. Not many people hold the same opinion. Usually, unpopular opinions are controversial opinions, but not all controversial opinions are unpopular opinions. In America, for example, all the political debates, there's rarely what you would call an unpopular opinion. For the most part, it's just controversial opinions, because for the most part in the United States, there are two main factions that are at each other's throats. And that's how that works. So a point of view that's a Democratic point of view or a Republican point of view usually isn't an unpopular opinion, because typically you have the whole size of half the country backing you up. There are still some unpopular opinions, but that's more like when you get into the fringes of stuff. Or you get into weird conspiracy, like make Alex Jones look sane level conspiracy theories. Where did this start off? So boomers will just unsolicitedly give these opinions. Now, online, you usually see this apply to conservatives. That's just because there's a heavy slant on the online population of people who call people boomers. I do think it's fully possible to be a liberal boomer. For example, a lot of people pushing for, say, Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren might fall into the category of liberal boomer. Boomers wouldn't support, for example, Andrew Yang. Although I guess they could, yeah. Bernie Sanders, I think Bernie Sanders supporters might fashion themselves as the most anti-boomer sect out there, but I think there are a lot of Bernie boomers out there. But basically, they give unsolicited political opinions, almost already ready for a fight, but already looking like they're going to play the victim because they think that their opinion is unpopular. Here's the thing about me. I think political opinions should be something kept private. I don't want to see your political opinions. If I see your political opinions, I throw up immediately. I can't help it. You know, back when I was walking around in America, couldn't stop me from throwing up everywhere. It was a mess. I saw a doctor, but it was too expensive. So, when you go into Pete Sinclair's Facebook profile, there's a lot of unsolicited political stuff. Facebook is one of the most boomerish social media platforms out there. And I mean that by people throwing political opinions just out there in the public sphere, already expecting to fight as if they're the victim, even though they're the ones who brought it up. Now, personally, I think Twitter could fall into a big category of boomers. But Facebook, a lot of the conversations on Facebook seem to have some disconnect with how people talk today. Posting just random comments on unrelated pictures saying, "Tell the kids hi for me." What does that have to do with anything? Couldn't you send that in a private message? Send that in a private message. Don't post it on a dude's I don't know, someone's photo album or something. In fact, there is a Facebook group where people who aren't boomers pretend to be boomers that illustrate my point exactly, what the atmosphere of a boomer is. Yes, there's the Facebook page, a group where we all pretend to be boomers. This post is just a blurry picture of the wall, and it says, "Dinner with Tim." The comments say, "Can you take another photograph? I can't see him," with weird capitalization. And then another dude replies, in all caps, "I am not good with the photos. Tom is eating his steak now," with ... Random uses of emoji. People talking in all caps again. Not because they're yelling, but because they turned on caps lock and don't know how to turn it off. "Glad to hear," with "hear" misspelled. "Hope he's enjoying it. Praying you're doing alright after knee surgery. No medication, in pain. God will see me through this. Tom says to take the painkiller, but I say, heck no." Basically, a conversation you expect from the stereotypical boomer. Something that really should be something confined to like a private message maybe, not how people usually use social media. Here's another thing about the boomer thing. Frankly, it's all in good fun. It's not actually meant to be, one of those, biting insults. It's not meant to be an actual insult. If you look up "okay boomer" on Wikipedia, it says it's a meme. Because guess what? It's a meme. It's a joke. It's supposed to be lighthearted. Anyone using the boomer meme unironically, just attacking people saying you're a boomer, and actually with negativity in their hearts and mind, are themselves a boomer, because that's not how the joke is supposed to be. It's a joke. And likewise, if you take offense to the boomer meme, odds are you're a boomer. Which is something I should have foreseen when I called him a conservative boomer, because that's what people who are the target of that joke tend to actually take offense to it. The boomer meme began on 4chan, of all websites, at least the current strain of the boomer meme. Do you think boomer is actually meant to attack, for example, conservatives when it's on 4chan? Not really, no. And I think the best example of this is when you look up the Wojak boomer. Wojak is the name of, right now, the currently used meme face on 4chan. It's sort of the face of 4chan right now. And the modified Wojak is the boomer. Now, the boomer, if you look at them, typically when 4chan wants to legitimately make fun of someone, they'll do it with a angry crying Wojak who's hiding behind a happy mask or something like that. 4chan has a way of creating caricatures to strike someone, to really piss off someone. The boomer Wojak, the boomer meme image, is this dude with sunglasses and a small little smile with a can of Monster Energy drink. And you know what? This dude looks content as all can be. This dude is happy. He's happier than any of us are. For example, I have right here from 4chan, one of those 30-year-old boomer. Grills all year round regardless of weather. Literally is the Russian hacker you hear about on CNN. Couldn't care less. Gets up at 6 a.m. to mow lawn. Sips Monster Energy drink. Blast AC/DC in his car. Owns a house. So basically, the boomer meme is this really chill dude, this laid-back dude, not a care in the world. He understands his own beliefs. He's following those up, not necessarily taking much time to reflect. And he is free as a bird. And frankly, a little bit of the 4chan culture is wishing we were like the boomers. The character that's typically paired with the boomer is I don't know if he's called a millennial, but it's this dude with circle glasses, a weird haircut, a unibrow, and he's almost always has an expression of anger or sadness. He might be crying. And that's supposed to be the character 4chan relates to, at least moreover than the boomer. It expresses that the boomer is a state of mind that we all appeal to. Is appeal the right word? Aspire to. That might be better. The boomer is what we aspire to. And keep in mind, the boomer range is like in the 30-year-olds. 30-year-olds are boomer. Anything older than that, then it's like not actually funny. But people in their 30s, maybe even their 40s, but 30s is the boomer. We're not talking about literal baby boomers here. So boomer is one of those, almost a term of endearment as far as the meme goes. We're looking at them with just, they aren't, hating every single thing they do. They don't have those moments where they sit back and like cringe at stuff they've done in the past. They're confident, they're sure of themselves, and they're going for it. And you know what? That's more than most of us can say. And I kind of said as much in the video. Societies and cultures can be measured by what is called context, as in low context societies or low context cultures, and high context societies or high context cultures. High context cultures, speaking as someone who lived in America and then lived in Japan, it's quite obvious that Japan is a high context culture, while America, depending on where you are, who you're with, varies between what level of context is in the culture. But it's really hard to describe besides an unspoken understanding. If you live in a high context society, a lot of stuff goes unsaid because people just assume you already know it. They think you can read the air, you can understand the social cues, and you can kind of figure things out for yourself. You've lived life, you understand how this works, so you don't have to say every single thing that comes to mind. It's just some things are obvious. Japan, with the exception of whenever they overreact and go, sugoi, to every single thing, when they're not overreacting to stuff, they tend to be quiet and say only really what needs to be said. America is not a high context culture. I won't say it's low context, but it's not high context. There's definitely an element of making things said. Like, there's an element of if you don't say something, people are going to assume something else, despite knowing more context about you and context about where you come from to understand. I hope you get what I'm saying. It's hard to explain context cultures. And I think I'm starting to understand that part of my disconnect with a lot of people that makes this world a clown world, is because I'm someone who's used to a more high context environment. I do well in a high context environment. Some people don't. For example, we can get into a lot of people who've been to Japan. Some people feel something entirely different when they go to Japan and feel like they're being looked down upon and stuff like that. And most of the time that's because they aren't doing so well in a high context culture. Other people who do well in Japan and stuff like that typically do well in a high context culture. I do well with high context, and I think that's why I get a lot of flack in my comments for saying things that the comments say things that I thought was already implied. I'm like, yeah, duh. And I believe it was either last episode of the Commander's Cabin podcast or the one before it, where I just railed about how I will always get yelled at in my comment section because they accuse me of like not saying something that should have been obvious. For example, wondering why I didn't include Rise of Skywalker in my ranking of Star Wars movies when I thought it was obvious because the movie wasn't out yet. People watching that and understand, if they wonder, I wonder why Rise of Skywalker is on the list. They can look at the upload date. They'll probably, first thing they do, if they would do well in a high context society, would be look at the upload date and look at when Rise of Skywalker came out. And then that's probably as far as they need to go. People who do well in a low context culture will immediately comment, why didn't you include Rise of Skywalker? And I think if I realize that there are people who do well with high context cultures and people who don't and do well in low context cultures, maybe I can sort of understand my comment section a little bit better. I assumed that the boomer joke was understood as a joke because nobody calls boomers unironically unless they themselves are a boomer. But I realized that the whole boomers are kind of low context. And just to be clear, I'm talking about the meme boomers. I'm not talking about actual boomers. Jesus Christ, I feel my brain die that I have to clarify that. But Pete Sinclair might not do well with high context. If he has exhibited enough traits for me to call him a boomer, he probably doesn't, and therefore he didn't get the joke. Now, okay, even then, even if you don't get the joke, you have person A calling you racist. You have person B calling you a bigot. And behind both of those are several people who agree with them. You have one meme lord step out and say he's not a racist, he's just a boomer. The dude defending you. And you passive aggressively strike at the one defending you. That's cool. Piss off. I regret defending this guy. I regret so much. I regret being born, I would even say. But that's a given. But it amazes me. I'm the one he chooses to go after? What is this? This is a clown world. Nothing actually matters. Everything I think that matters in the world doesn't matter. Why do we live just to suffer? Every night I can feel my leg. I am literally at a loss for words right now. I don't know how to respond to something so stupid like that. If he likes being called a racist and a bigot and whatever, fine. Let him call himself that. I'm not going to defend him if he wants to call himself a racist, because I don't want to defend someone who calls themselves a racist. That should be easy enough to understand. Now you might say, I could see someone firing back that, oh, he realizes that the people calling him racist and stuff don't matter, they're just trolls on the internet. If people on the internet don't matter, why did you strike at me? Because I'm a person on the internet. There's nothing that makes sense about this. Literally nothing. I am flabbergasted. Absolutely flabbergasted. I'm so flabbergasted, I'm using the term flabbergasted. Since the Sinclair incident, I've realized that everyone on the internet is retarded. So, I am just gonna retreat back to my little game videos and let the world burn outside. Because you know what? The world doesn't matter. None of this matters. The planet Earth, in all of its creativity, was inherited by a stupid species of creature that don't deserve it. Speaking of Clown World, remember when I made the video talking about how you don't want a Beast Wars movie? A few days after I make that video, the news comes out. It's a rumor. I don't think it's confirmed. And even if it is confirmed, I wouldn't take too much stock in it. But they're making a Beast Wars movie. I'm gonna kill myself tonight. I could go on a tirade as to why you shouldn't make a Beast Wars movie, but I already did that. Watch that video. But the fact that that came out immediately after, almost immediately after, makes me want to die. It's... Gee, thanks everyone who said, I want a Beast Wars movie. It was trending on Twitter too. I don't think people have the ability to think. The more time I spend online, the more, people get on me for being elitist, but I wasn't like this before I was more active on the internet. And now I also didn't really talk much to people before the internet. Since I started being active on the internet, I've been in contact with so many people, talking to so many people, hearing the opinions of so many people, and I realized that the human race doesn't deserve to survive. And I do think I am better than most people, because I think most people looking at Twitter will say, yeah, I'm probably better than most people. Guys, you're not gonna believe this. What I'm about to say might sound crazy. But, it might sound totally insane. I'm gonna say it and you're gonna say Radix. That's not the case. That's not possible. Radix, you're overthinking things. Well, I'm gonna say, I think I'm too negative. I think I'm too negative. I think... And this is the aftermath of the Clown World fiasco. Because with the Clown World fiasco, I've discovered that life is meaningless. Nothing matters. So what's the point in me being so angry about it? If nothing matters, why am I so angry? When you look back at the when you look back at the golden age, there's a running theme with some of my recent videos right now, looking back at the golden age. So we're going to drag this into the whole looking back at the golden age saga. But looking back at the golden age of the channel, I was probably basing a lot more of my stuff on General Sam and a little bit of Lost Pause, Noble from Lost Pause. And Noble from Lost Pause is just a bro. He's just a dude who laughs constantly, laughs at his own jokes. And I certainly laugh at my own jokes, but it was sort of a different laugh at my own jokes back then. It seemed like a lot happier time, even though I was technically more depressed during the golden age. So, it's a very interesting... People say... Okay, first, step one. There's going to be two to three different layers of people say going on right now. Layer one, people say that depression cultivates creativity. That it makes you more reflective on life, it makes you more sensitive to things, and results in more creativity if you channel that depression. The second level of people say that people who say, and I didn't stutter there, this is the full sentence, people say that people who say depression cultivates creativity are wrong and are romanticizing depression. They say depression doesn't work like that. Depression makes you sad. It makes you not want to do anything. You aren't creative when you're depressed. Now here's what I'm going to go into what I say. I say that people who say that depression I lost myself in that sentence. I'm going to say I agree with the people who say depression can cultivate better creativity. Because in my personal experience, the times when I was the most depressed created the golden age. It created the best era of my channel. It created the videos that I constantly look back on. Katawa Shoujo came out of depression. VR chat kind of came out of depression. A lot of stuff... This channel in and of itself became active because of depression. I don't think I've given the whole story as to why this channel really took off, or why I really started doing YouTube. I think I've told it bits and pieces across videos. Maybe we'll get into this podcast, but I have a different thing to talk about right now. And that is, yeah, when I was depressed, I made better videos. I really start to get out of my depression. It's a slow transition, but I start to get better between my trip to the Netherlands and until I got into Japan. And there's some time period in Japan where I would still consider myself majorly depressed. But for the most part these days, a lot of my sources of depression are gone, which, a lot of my sources for everything are gone. I picked up and moved countries. Almost nothing is familiar around me. I don't know anyone, and well, that's not entirely true. It feels like a more fresher start. It's not a hard reboot, but it's a bit of a soft reboot. It's a bit of a revamp. It's like when a Pokemon, Ash goes to a new region, and maybe a few of his friends are still there, or there will be a crossover episode with a previous adventurer meeting up with him again, and he might have some of the same Pokemon, but it still feels fresh and new. That's sort of what Japan has been so far. And now that my depression, and it's not as easy as depression's gone, bada bing, bada boom, but it's the state in which it really impacted me. The state where thinking about all the bad stuff, where thinking about all the bad stuff was the only thing on my mind, that's really simmered down. And what resulted was a lot of videos that I think are kind of uninspired. Ultimately I think this comes down to my editing style, which is weird because I will not go back on when I say editing doesn't matter that much. I still hold that position. Editing does not matter that much. If you want to make a good video, if you want to make a video people will watch, or if you want to make videos that will keep coming, I don't think editing's that important. Editing editing only benefits me. Because I don't necessarily rewatch videos that I haven't edited that much. I might watch videos and say, oh yeah, that's a great point, but they're still my own points. It's still me saying stuff. I can look back and appreciate edits more than I can look back and appreciate points, because watching videos where I make points is a lot like well yeah, duh, me. Oh my god, this dude's literally me. But I do want to get back to... There was a spirit in that editing, I guess, that I really want to bring back. Of course, it's hard to bring that into things like Commander's Cabin, which is a podcast, but I hope I've shown that in a lot of my more recent videos. A lot more commentary stuff happening, a lot more community involvement. I should talk about that later on in this podcast. A lot of community involvement and more editing in games and stuff like that. My number one issue is that I don't have time for scripting or research. And that really impacts a lot of my Transformers lore episodes and my Primus Academy videos. For a while, there might not be that many Transformers stuff, and you might think, oh, is Radix doing another get rid of the Transformers? And that's not true. I am trying to decrease it a little bit, but it's not ever going to be gone. Not until I have a significant audience that my channel can still stand without the Transformers stuff. Let me tell you, if I could stop doing Transformers stuff and still keep my audience and keep them engaged as they are in my Transformer videos, but instead engaged on my non-Transformer videos, I wouldn't be making Transformer videos. The Transformer stuff is part of a formula. If you want to make a personality channel like mine, you need to have the marketable stuff to get people coming to your channel, and then hope they stay around to watch the non-marketable stuff and get to know you and get to be invested in your narrative. I've talked about this before, but I watch YouTubers because I like those YouTubers as personalities. I don't really understand this concept of grouping YouTubers together as oh, they're a such and such YouTuber. Well, what does that mean? Are they confined to only making stuff like that forever? That's not how the artistic process works. I guess that's probably the weakness of the Commander Radix channel. That's definitely more artistic than it is marketability. It's hard to make a living on art than it is marketability. But yeah, I watch YouTubers because of their personality. I don't really care about what content they're making. It seems that most of the people who watch YouTube are of the opposite opinion, which is unfortunate. But I need to get people invested in my narrative. People aren't going to Google Commander Radix. They're going to Google Transformers history and stuff like that. And that's where they find my channel. If they like the stuff, they subscribe. And then my non-Transformer videos pop up in their feed. Ideally, they click on it and watch it. By the way, Commander's Cabin, going strong as a podcast. We are not the lowest view ranking series I do, which is impressive. I thought my game videos would make a bit higher views. Currently my Skyrim video that is supposed to be the what's the word? Wedge, the leading figure, the spearhead of the new Golden Age movement is sitting at around 20 views. That's depressing, because that's supposed to be, you know, like how the DC Rebirth era began with Rebirth #1. That Skyrim video is my Rebirth #1 to mark the transition, and nobody's watched it. That being said, making that Skyrim video was a blast. I already made a second video just right off the bat. I don't know which is going to come out first, this video or the Skyrim video, episode 2. I think the Skyrim episode 2 video is coming out first, since I'm rendering it as I'm recording this. But I am having fun with Skyrim so far. And as a result, even though I said it was going to be a weekly series, it might be very much more than a weekly series. It could pop up like, you know, twice, 3 times a week. Because I am having fun. It is great. I really hope the views get up. I feel like I was trying to make a point and then I got stuck on a tangent. The new depression. Yeah, I feel like I was more creative when I was depressed. Yeah. I'm trying to channel that, but I'm not that depressed anymore. The Golden Age Commander Radix / Primus Prime 22 was definitely a depressed boy. B-O-I, boy. Right now, not so much. But I just need to recapture that. I need to figure out what worked and apply it to the modern day. I need to stop being so negative. That's where this all started out. Because around the time I stopped being depressed was around the time I started becoming more and more negative. And I'm already a pessimistic, negative person anyway. But when the depression goes away, the depression had this effect of making me feel inferior to everyone. And I might meme that I felt better than anyone. But that was just a meme. With the depression slowly leaving, like I said before, you know, looking at Twitter, I'm like, so I'm actually better than most people, huh? Like, unironically. And I think that resulted in a sense of negativity that, oh great, I'm in this world filled with idiots. And that just made me bitter. But as I'm starting to realize that it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. This life that we all search for meaning, it has no meaning. So stop worrying about it, Radix. So I'm going to try to stop worrying about it. I'm going to try to stop. Whenever I see something that just pisses me off, I'm just going to say to myself, clown world, and then move on. It's not worth my time. It's not worth spending every hour of the day upset that I live in a clown world. So, yeah. That's what I need to do. Become less negative, be a little bit more lighthearted, be more General Sam. Because I was shifting more towards Digibro, but General Sam, what I respect the most out of General Sam is how much he just doesn't care about anything. And then I look at Digibro, and Digibro is definitely someone who thinks he's better than everyone and is angry that people are below him. He doesn't want to think that he's the better than everyone. He wants people to rise above what they are right now, and because they aren't, he gets so angry. General Sam has become so disillusioned with life that he just disconnected and just laughs and becomes callous. I need to become more like that. I need to just laugh things off, think, haha, oh, what a world, and then move on, because it's not worth being angry about a clown world. If nothing matters, the clown world doesn't matter either. Speaking of General Sam, he had a video that he said something in a Q&A or something that was really inspiring to me, and that was he doesn't do stuff he doesn't want to do if he can get away with not doing it. Basically, there was I think it was his brother or father who asked to go like boating with him or something like that. I can't remember the details, but a family member asked him to go on some sort of outing, and General Sam, who wouldn't want to do that, just replied no. Didn't bother with any excuses, didn't bother with softening it, just said no. And that, when I heard that, I'm like, that is inspiring, because I've always struggled with saying no. Recently, I am proud of myself. I am proud, believe it or not, I'm proud of myself. Recently, I had the situation where someone asked me to a party, and you know what I said? Well, okay, I said, sorry, no. So I softened it with a sorry. But I think that's fine, because you know what? I'm not going to a party on Friday. I get to stay home. I get to make videos. And that is great. And that's a good thing. I hate news articles that start with, or end with, and that's a good thing. You know, it's not your job to tell us what is a good thing and what is a bad thing. Okay, let me take a drink of water before I get on a tangent about and that's a good thing, journalism. Okay. So yeah, I am proud I do not have to go to that party on Friday. And I know some people are like, wow, you stay inside all the time? That's really lame. No, it's how I enjoy my life, and I shouldn't live my life trying to do what you think is what a person should do. It is almost definition of boomer. But, anyway... I love staying indoors. In Japan, there is a stigma about being indoors. There's this misconception, I think, about Japan being introverted. I can see how that misconception pops up, but I disagree with that idea entirely. I think Japan is one of the least introverted places, depending on your definition of introverted. If your definition of introverted is enjoying yourself, staying at home, doing your own thing, then Japan is not introverted. If your definition of introverted is For example, not being expected to... One example I can think of is like at a meeting. I think in the United States, if you're at a business meeting or of some sort, and it's, you know, and it's like a smaller size meeting, there's sort of pressure on you to like contribute or at least say something in the meeting. The same thing goes for like college classes and stuff like that. At least in my experience with smaller college class sizes, you're expected to say something. You're even graded on contributing to the class. Japan doesn't really do that. Japan is like, if you have nothing to contribute, don't say anything. And that's okay. We don't want people to just feel themselves to be compelled to contribute if their contribution is going to be compelled to do so, and not because they actually have an idea. But Japan is very much a be social, but not actually social. I think another level of the introvertedness is how much you're expected to say about yourself. In Japan, you're not really expected to say much about yourself. You know, pretty much life goes through a script where like they say a phrase and there is a set phrase that responds to that phrase. It's almost like clockwork, like a robot. You can have like a full 20-minute conversation without really saying anything original. And then after that 20 minutes, the conversation naturally stops. While in the United States, if you co-work with someone or if you're friends with someone, you're expected to like let them know stuff about you. And that's really not the case in Japan that much. Like only in like really, really close friends will they start to open up more about who they are. I hear a lot of foreigners say, "Oh, you can't make friends in Japan." But basically, a lot of the opinions on what friendship is in Japan lines up with what I view a friendship, which is, I'm not just going to become your friend, you know. I jive well with a lot of stuff going on in Japan, and I can't help but wonder if that has anything to do with being part Japanese and what elements of the culture might have passed down subconsciously through generations. But I do very well in Japan. A lot of this stuff jives well with me. The only part that doesn't, and this is part where I can definitely see my Americanness, and this is specifically my Southernness. The one part where I see my Southernness in Japan, and where it doesn't jive well with Japanese culture, is the social aspect. Southerners, I believe, are intensely private. Southerners are kind of similar to Japanese in the fact that they are hospitable and like want to leave good impressions, and I should add small talk. Small talk isn't really a thing in Japan. There are these set phrase conversations, but when you walk by someone on the street, no matter what size town you're in, nobody's going to say hello to you. Nobody makes small talk in the elevator. In America, you feel like if someone sits beside you on the bus or something, there's like this element where you have to introduce yourself and say, "Hey, crazy weather we've been having lately." In Japan, you can be like crammed up right next to someone and not say anything. And if you say anything, that's weird. But the social aspect. Southerners, very hospitable, very want to present stuff being friendly, but they'll throw a lot more small talk and stuff like that and try to get to know you a bit more than Japanese will. But when it comes to their home lives, they are much more intensely private. I believe some studies said Southerners are one of the most private people in the world. It takes a lot to open their doors. In my personal experience, I hate when people ask, "What are you going to do this weekend?" or something unprompted. And because like, you don't need to know that. You don't need to know what I'm going to do. I get that question asked a lot in Japan, though. But anyway, the social aspect in Japan, you're expected to go to a lot of parties. Not so much meetings, but definitely a lot of parties outside work. That even though they're parties, most people actually consider it work, even though you're not being paid and it's a party, because a Japanese party is sitting at a table, giving set phrases. It's time away from home. It's work time. All the parties are typically counted amongst the hours people spend overtime when people are doing their studies of Japanese culture and overworking. Yeah, the thing that I do not jive well with in Japan is expecting me to surrender my free time for parties and overtime. That's the one thing I can't really, I don't do well with. Everything else is pretty good. I am getting annoyed at taking shoes off all the time. Not necessarily all the time, but there are some situations where things just become inconvenient. I'm like, whew, if we didn't have this shoe thing, this would go a lot faster. For example, everyone's going down to the city to have a department level meeting with everyone else across the region. And then you go there and there's a place outside of the office building to put your shoes away. So you put your shoes into the thing. And then you go into the meeting hall and then you have this assembly meeting, and then the meeting's over, everyone leaves to go to lunch, and all of a sudden you have like 1,000 people packed into one entryway trying to get their shoes, put on their shoes, change their shoes, and walk out. Which doesn't work. That just doesn't work. That's ridiculous. There are weird, arbitrary positions on taking off your shoes where, like, oh, if the floor level has inclined a little bit, usually you take off your shoes, except if the floor is, like, built like this. And it's just insane. I don't like that. That being said, there are people in America who wear shoes in their house. I've never worn shoes in my house. That's ridiculous. Shoes are uncomfortable to me. Let my feet breathe. I'm fine with taking off my shoes in my house. But like in Japan, you have 2 pairs of shoes, which isn't really any different. And the thing is, there isn't really here's a misconception. The shoes you wear indoors are a special type of indoor shoes compared to the outdoor shoes. No, you could literally have the same exact pair, one for outdoors, one for indoors. There's nothing that really separates the two. Now, maybe like if you're wearing like rain boots, that's a little weird. but like tennis shoes, for example, can be outdoor, can be indoor, but they can't be both. So yeah, you have to have different pairs of shoes. I go to my workplace, take off my black tennis shoes, put on a different pair of black tennis shoes, then enter the building. Because God forbid you wear your outdoor shoes indoors. Society itself will crumble like you've never seen before. So it's been a hot minute since I've come to Japan, and specifically come to Okinawa. Let's talk a little bit about what I've discovered in regards to Okinawan identity, or at least personal identity, I should say. Because here's the story about me. I am part Japanese. Specifically, that part is Okinawan. And there is a difference between Okinawan and Japanese in so much as we have 2 different terms for them, Japanese and Okinawan. But how different the two are has always been something up in the air, because I had never been to Okinawa. I know my relatives used Japanese and used Okinawan, but, once you got to know them, they would use Okinawan. However, the older generation tends to call themselves Okinawan. Well, not all, but some of the older generation tend to call themselves Okinawan rather than Japanese. But I really didn't understand, how do Japanese view Okinawans today? How do Okinawans view Japanese today? How do Okinawans view themselves today? And another question I had was, how would I be viewed in Japan? And how would I be viewed in Okinawa? And I certainly know how I'm viewed in the United States. In the United States, there have been a whole mixture of how people view me, a whole wide variety. There were people who saw me only as white. There have been people who pretty much saw me only as Japanese. Through a large amount of time, I was just known as the Japanese guy. Of course, there weren't that many Japanese people in North Carolina. It's kind of across the world from Japan. And then there were some people who viewed me as, just being mixed, being part Japanese, part white American. And I feel that there's a very small amount of people who really understood it, because in America, even though America is such a racially diverse place, and even though there's a significant amount of mixed race people in America, the understanding of race is still a binary in the United States. That, you are either one race or you are the other. And if you happen to be a mixture of one or the other, you're really just the one you're mostly of, and any other cultural ties that you might have are irrelevant. And if you're just half, you're just whatever you look like. I think a lot of the impression of race in the United States is based off of phenotypes, based on outward appearance. But I think there's even less of a emphasis on ethnicity than there is on race. I think the fact that a lot of ethnic identity was lost, and the fact that immigrants from all over Europe came to America, and slaves from all across Africa were brought together, so the white and black community are sort of both a mixture of ethnicities from Europe and Africa in the United States, and those are the two primary races in the United States, kind of impacted this thing where they see people more as a race than as an ethnicity. But yeah, I got mixed views on my mixedness in the United States, but you would go from someone who's saying you're just white to me one day to being beaten up in your school bathroom for being Japanese the next. So, very wide range of what was going on in the United States that I don't know what was going on there. Where do I want to start? Do I want to start with Okinawan identity or my identity before I get into which bit do I want to start next? I guess it might be smoother to go to my identity in Japan, how others perceive me, how I've understood more about I guess we can start with that, because how I understand myself ties into Okinawan identity. So, moving to Japan, in general, how do I view how people have viewed me here? Ultimately, it's honestly kind of more accurate. I feel like I've been seen in Japan than in the United States. Because in Japan, there's very much this view of something should be something. Like, people say that X is always X, so X will always be X. And when X isn't always X, oh, there's something different here, and that difference becomes a major thing. Anyway, how have Japanese viewed me here? Again, I think it's been a bit more accurate. I think I have been more consistently viewed here as being a mix of Japanese and American, more so than I was viewed in the United States. I've had a collection of experiences. People talking to me in like full-on Japanese, and then when they discover I'm American, they're shocked and say, "Oh, you have," and I quote, "a face that looks like you would speak Japanese." Which, like, what does that mean? You have a face that looks like you would speak Japanese. That's a Japanism if I've ever heard one. There was an incident where we were talking about what did you eat in America for lunch or for dinner. For dinner, they asked. And like, you probably ate only bread and mashed potatoes, right? And I'm like, well, no, I actually ate a lot of rice. We used to eat a lot of rice in America. And then they're like, really? And then one of them went, and then pointed at me, and then went, "That's because you're Japanese." I'm like, well, that's how you choose to see it, man. Which, I wouldn't be surprised if there was an element as to why my family ate so much rice because of being Japanese, but also we're in the South, and the South eats a lot of rice. So I think the family was predetermined to eat rice. Whenever any sort of ancestral worship thing happens here, they tend to drag me into it, and other foreigners in the area aren't. And the argument is always, well, their ancestors aren't here. So, I'm like, okay. All in all, I think I've been seen as Japanese American here, which I feel it feels great to be seen more accurately. In the United States, there was that portion who only saw me as white. There was a portion who overblew the Japanese stuff. The fact of the matter is, I'm mixed. My identity is Okinawan, Japanese, and Southern American. Not like South American, like, from the South, Southerner. How do I word this? I have a Japanese and an American identity. That Japanese identity can be more focused into an Okinawan identity. That American identity can be more focused down into a Southern identity. In fact, I would say I associate more with Okinawan and Japanese, but when it comes to American, I really only associate with the southern part. I don't look at Americans who aren't from the South as necessarily the same people, like the same... Is people the right word? Basically, I have the same... if we could measure brotherhood by nationality, which sounds really weird, that sounds stupid, but if we could measure brotherhood by nationality, and I guess I would describe that as meeting someone, learning they're from the same area or country as you, and like, you know, that little sort of, oh, okay, you know, I'm from there too. I would say I feel a strong connection with Southerners, but the connection, if you were to measure it and give it a number, my measure for people not from the South, Americans not from the South, is the exact same as a European. If you are from a state that wasn't part of the former Confederacy, odds are I look at you as coming from a different country than me. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Like I make memes about the French and the Chinese and the Koreans and the who else do I make memes about? Mexicans, probably. But the fact of the matter is, individually, when I'm talking to someone, it's not memes. It's like, oh, you're from that country. Okay. I might make some jokes at your expense, but I don't actually hate people who aren't from what I identify as my in-group from my country. For example, the Lays of Koalas. Lays is in West Virginia. Dreadcore is in Delaware, but I think he was originally from Tennessee. I'm not sure where he was born exactly. I know he has ties to both Delaware and Tennessee, but Lays is in West Virginia. Old Trucks and Nightclub are in Washington. Subconsciously, I don't think of them as being from the same country as me. But meanwhile, I do recognize Cody and Twisted as being from the same, quote, country as me, since they're from the South. But I don't really think of the outer South, outside of the South, people like that. If there was like a British person and an Australian person and a Canadian, I would feel the same connection to them as I would it's hard to say because you don't actually feel like it's not like a meaningful connection. It's just okay. It's like a check mark in your brain that's subconscious. I really don't know how to describe this whatsoever. I look at people not from the South the same as foreigners. I guess that's the way I should say. Now that foreigners has a very negative connotation to it, doesn't it? I'm digging myself in a hole. Let's move on. So I think there are elements of the South that you cannot get out of me. I think there are elements of Japan that you can't get out of me. I think there's elements of Okinawa that you can't get out of me. We talked about the South, you know, the intense privacy. I love Southern food for the most part. There's some Southern dishes I don't like, but if you were to make a list of my favorite foods, hamburgers and pizza would be first. But then later on you'd get into like chicken and dumplings and country-style steak, stuff like that. I think Southern culture might be the only culture in the United States that I actually like. A lot of the South was settled by, how is it pronounced? Yeomen? But basically people from Scotland and stuff like that who purposefully came to America to get as far away from people as possible. And I think that legacy kind of went into the modern-day Southerner. A lot of yeomen prided themselves on making their own estates and being self-sufficient with their own food and stuff, and so they hated government when it came to like whenever the Union was established and all that. I think that persists in the modern day Southerner, and I think elements of that persist in myself as well. Meanwhile, when it comes to Japanese stuff, a lot more of the intangible culture I think I find in myself from Japan. Stuff like values, stuff like philosophy, a lot of being at peace with the world, which is really juxtaposed against my general anger. But part of it's just entertainment purposes. When I'm at home, I am the most chill, aesthetic stuff going down in here. It's very quiet, very peaceful when I'm home alone. A lot of values from Japan. I speak Japanese, which to some degree, it's very difficult to be able to speak a language fluently and not hold some sort of subconscious elements from that culture. It's possible, but not... It tends to happen. Now, let's talk Okinawa. Okinawa, if you don't know, is an island. Well, really, we can apply this to the whole Ryukyu chain. Ryukyu is the name of the chain of islands, with the largest being Okinawa. The Ryukyus were an independent country from Japan for a while, but that's really weird to say because Japan didn't exist as a country. during most of the time the Ryukyu Kingdom was independent. When the Ryukyu Kingdom was independent, so was nearly every province of Japan. Japan went through a large period of time not being unified. Instead, different regions of Japan were independent provinces under the leader of their, for example, daimyo. And times changed throughout the years, but the daimyo were pretty much had the most authority. People in Japan held an identity of their domain. You know, I wasn't Japanese, I am Satsuma. What's the name of the clan that ruled Hokkaido? Matsumaya or something? I don't remember. But, like, you know, I'm not Japanese, I'm under the rule of Taira and stuff like that, which is really similar to feudal Europe, where there wasn't this sense of a national identity as it was loyalty to a feudal lord. The Ryukyu Kingdom existed for the most part concurrently with these feudal domains, so it's hard to say Okinawa was independent from Japan when Japan didn't exist. But as an independent nation that's geographically separated from Japan, it developed a sort of independent culture, some things that are decidedly Okinawan, and nothing you really see in mainland Japan. But that being said, a lot of provinces of Japan have their own stuff going on there that you don't see in the rest of the country, you know, that are local culture. There is still this, in the modern day, still this overlaying Japaneseness, a Japanese national identity from the entire country, and I would include Okinawa in that. Okinawa has it at this point. Okinawan culture is the local culture. Japanese culture is the higher level culture that can be applied on all regions in the nation. I think it's Okinawa is Japan. I think some people blow the cultural stuff out of proportion. They blow the history out of proportion. Okinawa is still Japan. There's the ethnic argument that Okinawans are ethnically different from Japanese, but in my DNA testing, I found Okinawans tend to be around 80% Japanese, with a little bit of other stuff from Papua New Guinea, and maybe a little bit from China. Frankly, mostly from Papua New Guinea and like the southern islands off the coast. But ethnically, they are mostly Japanese. To say Okinawa is completely independent from Japan is ridiculous when the Okinawan language has so many... The Okinawan language is a Japonic language. It's a language in the Japanese language family. It's not Japanese. There is this argument of, the Okinawan language is just a dialect of Japanese. We are all one people. No, the Okinawan language is a separate language. But it is in the same language family. In fact, let's talk about the language a little bit. The language situation in Okinawa is strongly political, because Japan wants to put up this front that we are an ethnically homogenous country. We are only one ethnicity, one race, one culture. And sure, there are local cultures, but we're all the same people. And sure, Japanese has a lot of variants, but they're all just dialects. And indeed, some dialects of Japanese can get crazy different, but they're still recognizable as dialects of Japanese. Japan tried to say that the Okinawan language is just a dialect of Japanese. That doesn't work. Dialects don't work that way. Dialects don't have completely independent grammatical structures. Dialects don't include a huge shift in vocabulary. Dialects just don't work that way. Okinawan is clearly a descendant from Old Japanese. Old Japanese broke off into Modern Japanese and all its dialects, and into Okinawan, separately. There is an Okinawan dialect of Japanese, but that Okinawan dialect of Japanese is not the Okinawan language. In Japanese, both the Okinawan dialect of Japanese and the Okinawan language are all referred to as Okinawa Hogen, Okinawa dialect. And that gets annoying when you're talking about the language. Typically when I talk about the language, I call it Uchinaguchi when I'm talking about it in Japanese to other Okinawans, because Hogen can be a lot of stuff. Uchinaguchi is the language that you really can't swivel around that. Now, some people really like to go over the top and say, oh, the Okinawan language is actually several languages that are mutually unintelligible to each other. You can't understand any of them. If you learn one Okinawan language, all the others will still be completely alien to you. It's like learning Korean and trying to understand Chinese. No. The Okinawan language has a lot of divergence and diversification from the long stretches of islands that it has, but it ultimately the Okinawan language is ultimately separated into dialects. It's not really separated into several languages. Now, Yayama might speak something radically different from Amami, but there's, at least with the core of Okinawa, things are roughly the same. Now, there is a lot of variety in the language on one island, but I would say it's still the same language. Really, all that happens is some particles change a sound, or there might be a completely different word for like terms like ma'am or sir. Some dialects might allow females to use the masculine ending, some might not, but they're still, for the most part, if you are cognizant of the differences in the language dialects, you can understand them all if you speak one. If you speak Central Uchinaguchi, that is. Similar to how Japanese has the standard Tokyo dialect, but when you go to the Tohoku region, the language gets weird. You can still kinda understand it. Now, how long has Okinawa been under Japanese rule? Well, a lot earlier than most people say it is. A lot of politically active Okinawans, which proportionally is a large proportion of the population compared to other Japanese people, but still a small amount of the population, politically active Japanese people will say Okinawa was a completely independent country and didn't fall under Japanese occupation until the forced invasion of 1878, I believe it is. Is it 1878? 1879. 1879 was when it was annexed. But it's a bit more complicated than that, because in 1603 was when Japan actually invaded Okinawa. Or should I say Satsuma invaded Okinawa and took it over. But because Okinawa was a tribute state to China, they kind of had to be coy about it. Kind of had to be like, "You're ours now, except you can keep your flags up because we don't want China to get angry." But even before that, the Satsuma domain had the title of Lords of the Southern Islands, that being the Ryukyu Kingdom, for a long time, since the Taira and Minamoto were scuffling in like the 1100s. So Japan has had rule over Okinawa for a long time. People also say the Ryukyu Kingdom was an independent country. First of all, it was to varying degrees part of Japan since the 1100s. But also, China kept it as a tributary state for a long time. In fact, Chinese documents say they were kind of embarrassed with how gung-ho the Ryukyuans were with wanting to kowtow to China. They were the first tributary state to the Ming Empire, and they were really all for it. It was insane. Which, by the way, China will sometimes use the fact that the Ryukyu Kingdom was a tributary state to Ming China as an excuse to say Okinawa should be part of China and is rightful Chinese territory. But they only use that argument for Okinawa. If they said every single tributary state should be part of China, France should be part of China. France was registered by the Ming government as a barbarian tributary state because France was doing trade with China, and to some degree they had to be officially recognized as a tributary state. So if China said all tributary states are central parts of China, goodbye France. But no, they only use it for Okinawa because they hate Japan and it's all the East Asian politics. The Ryukyu Kingdom was never independent. Never fully independent. It was always, for a long time, just to varying degrees, part of Japan, and then for another period of time subservient to both Japan and China. The period before it became part of that, before the 1100s, was a lot of chieftain, like local rulers. Okinawa hadn't been unified. By the time Okinawa was unified, it was under the jurisdiction of Satsuma. Which leads into an interesting conversation I had with someone where they were talking about Okinawa, and they were talking about Scotland and Scotland's independence referendum. And they were like, so the Scots want independence? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, when did they get taken over by Britain? And I'm like, it's like around, they were formally integrated in 1707. And they're like, oh, that's too long ago. It's too long ago. You know, you're pretty much just Britain at this point. Scotland shouldn't be trying to get independence. They were annexed too long ago. And I'm like, oh, I see. And then they brought up, unlike Okinawa, which was annexed in 1879, I'm like, oh, here we go. Because this person's very, very pro-Okinawan independence. And it's like, yeah, it's not like Okinawa. We were taken over in 1879. Oh, God forbid. 1879, we know that's still in living memory. Although it's Okinawa, so you never know. We have the longest living people in the world. But even then, to varying degrees, you were part of Okinawa since the 1100s, or if you want to be lenient, 1600s. Okinawa has been under Japanese rule longer than Scotland has been under English rule. That was a weird conversation that I had. I was like, oh, Scotland wants independence? Oh, they've been part of Britain for too long. I'm like, oh, I guess. So based on observations, I think the South is less part of the United States than, culturally speaking, than Okinawa is part of Japan. I don't know if I said that right. There's more differences between the South and the rest of the United States than there are differences between Okinawa and mainland Japan. Also, these days, most Okinawans say, I'm Japanese. They'll say I'm Japanese, just flat out. Most people don't speak Okinawan anymore. The Okinawan Japanese culture is mainland Japanese culture, like national-wide culture, is just as prevalent as it is here, as it is in the other parts of Japan. Really, the only people that are gung-ho about, we are Okinawan, not Japanese, tend to be, people who are descent from Okinawans who left Okinawa. There was a period in the early 1900s where a lot of Okinawans started leaving Okinawa to go to the United States. And since they were so recently properly annexed by Japan, a lot of them just said we're Okinawan and didn't even bother to learn Japanese. There are Okinawan communities in Hawaii that speak English and Okinawan but not Japanese and don't view themselves as Japanese, like, in the slightest. They tend to be real, we are Okinawan, not Japanese. And then the politically active, for the most part, socialist camps of Okinawa tend to be pro-independence. Really because they get a lot of funding from China, and China wants to take Okinawa away from Japan. And so by having those guys stir up the whole we aren't Japanese argument, it makes things a bit unstable. Might give China a pretext to say, Japan, why are you oppressing these Okinawans? Oh, and make no mistake, I want to add to this, there is some issues with how Japan treats Okinawa. Now, I won't say it's like the average Japanese person and the average Okinawan persons get along just fine. They might be able to tell the difference between each other, but besides that, they all view themselves as Japanese. The Japanese government and the Okinawan government aren't so good. Mostly because Japan uses Okinawa as the person to bear most of the weight with the alliance with the United States. This podcast is getting fairly long. It's actually getting to the point where I want it to be. So I won't go into the details about the base stuff in the United States alliance. But just to put things into perspective, I hear U.S. military helicopters over here much more than I would like to. And they are so loud, they shake this building, and I don't even know how that works. I'll probably get into the U.S. military on Okinawa on a later date, because I have some things to say about that. But this is more about identity. My time in Japan has definitely helped me understand my Japanese identity, my Okinawan identity, and my American identity. Specifically Southern identity, but it all tends to bleed together. But in average conversation, that is. But I feel like the time in Okinawa was something I really needed. If you read up on the psychological studies that have been done about mixed race people, some people have a lot of identity issues, and I think I had a lot of struggles to go through, trying to rationalize identity sort of by myself. But this time I needed time to spend. I need to spend time in both worlds. That's what it ultimately comes down to. I need to spend time in America. I needed to spend time in Japan. I needed to spend time in Okinawa. And really, that was the only way I was going to understand what my ethnic and cultural identity is. So I'm really glad for this event, I guess. It's probably been one of the most meaningful experiences in my life. About once a week, I drive on down to the grocery store that's pretty much right beside my building. I go in, think I'm gonna get myself a nice chocolate bar. There's some great chocolate here. My favorite chocolate is one called Ghana. But I go get some chicken. I try to turn the corner to go down the aisle that has the chocolate to get myself a candy bar. But lo and behold, two old women are just standing there in the middle of the aisle, just talking. And I'm like, okay, I can't really get around you guys. You're kind of standing in my way. And then I listen to them. I realize they're talking Okinawan. And the Okinawan language is a language that I think is really important to me. The whole point in learning Japanese was as a heritage language. The whole point was, this is my heritage. I should be able to speak it. And now that I'm pretty much good on Japanese, I've been studying Okinawan, which really I don't have an opportunity to use even in Okinawa because it's not really spoken in Okinawa. But I turn the corner, I see these two old ladies speaking Okinawan to each other, and I'm hearing Okinawan spoken in an actual natural conversation. And just being able to just hear an ancestral language spoken live and well in my grocery store next door is just it's an interesting experience. But also, please get out of the way. I want to get my candy bar. Happens once a week. Always happens once a week. I spend a lot of money on candy. You have no idea. That's going to wrap up this episode of today's Commander's Cabin podcast. I hope you enjoyed. Consider checking me out on social media. All the links are in the description. Consider supporting me on Patreon. The link to that is in the description. Check out the tier rewards that you can get on Patreon. This episode is brought to you by $10 or more plus patrons, including Josh Adkins. If you want to be shouted out, check out the tiers and the Patreon. And yeah, have a great day, ladies and gentlemen.